I grew up in an average-sized town in the UK, and the neighborhood I live in is considered fairly bad for the area, but it's nothing in comparison to the bigger cities. At the time, it was summer. My friends and I had taken to smoking weed in one of the local parks. Classy, I know, but there wasn't much else for us to do. The night in question, we were doing this up until around 1 a.m., which is when I parted ways with my friends on the main road that led into my neighborhood. I was faced with a few options when it came to getting home. There was the main road, which was well lit, with the odd car passing every now and then, a dimly lit footpath that went past plenty of houses, but also down some pretty sketchy looking alleyways. And finally, the quickest way, which was a pitch black field and bridge that went over a stream. I've always been sensible when it comes to things like being aware of strangers, so I've never really worried about walking home alone. Plus, it was less than a 10-minute walk if you cut through the field. But tonight I felt a bit uneasy, probably because I was as high as a kite. I decided to take the much longer, more populated main road. Big mistake. As I walked past the turning for a residential street, I noticed a black people carrier type taxi pulled up, with the driver standing next to it talking on the phone. As I crossed the road, he went silent, and once I was on the other side, I heard him wolf whistle. Though it was summer, it was the UK, and so it was pretty cold and I dressed accordingly. I was around 17 and not particularly pretty, but being naturally thin and blonde was used to the odd cat call / stare here and there. I just tried to ignore it. A little further down the road, I had this odd feeling, like I should run home, but I put it down to being high and carried on walking. I contemplated going through the houses instead of carrying on down the main road. I turned around and my stomach practically fell out of my ass. The taxi I had passed shortly before was now driving ever so slowly behind me, but I was on the other side of the road. It had its lights off and was barely making a sound. I decided that the best option would be to get to the footpath and lug it home from there. However, as I was making my plan, the taxi sped up past me and pulled up in a bus stop further up the side of the road I was walking on, right next to the footpath I would need to take. Freaked out, I crossed to the other side of the road and walked past the taxi, keeping my head down. As I passed, the driver flashed his lights and wolf whistled a few more times, but I didn't look up. I just kept walking, determined to get home. Once again, the engine started up, and the taxi cruised past me. In hindsight, I should have looked up to get the driver's license plate, but I just didn't want to look, and came to a stop at a mini roundabout at the end of the road for a few seconds before turning right, the same way I had to go, and disappearing. Thinking that my ordeal was over, I began to relax a little. I was almost home after all. When I turned the corner though, my heart sank for the second time that night. The taxi hadn't gone. Instead, it was parked, mostly hidden by a white van, in a lay-by, meaning I would have to pass right next to him unless I made another right into a pitch-black alleyway. The latter seemed like a better option, and once I was off the road, I began to run. The houses are placed really weirdly, and it's hard to explain, but there are some houses with road outside, some with just paths, and between all these, back gardens and roads or alleyways. It's a bit of a maze, and very easy to get lost if you don't know your way. I ran between houses, and was about to go down another alleyway that led almost directly to my house, when I could see at the end a black people carrier, and a man was getting out of the driver's seat heading towards me. No, fuck that. I was out of there. I ran as fast as I possibly could without looking behind me, and finally made it to my house where I collapsed through the front door, shaking violently. This incident happened not all that long ago. I'm a 19-year-old female, and obviously enjoy the night out with my friends. This particular night, a girlfriend and I had headed down to our local club/pub. We were dancing, drinking, and having a great time, when I noticed it was about 2 a.m. coming up on the closing time, which was around 3, and we should probably think about heading off soon, as if we waited until it had closed, the wait for a taxi would be quite long, as everyone else would also be looking for one. So I let my friend know my plans, and she insists she wanted to stay. She then walked me out to the front as I waited for a taxi. As we get to the top of the stairs, she sees me off at the door and goes back inside. I say goodbye to the bouncers and start walking over to the next taxi in the line. As I start approaching the taxi, I hear my friend call me from behind. She still has my bank cards and money, luckily. I walk back to the door to get them off of her, and then say goodbye again. This time as I turn to leave, the bouncer says to me, "You may want to take the second taxi in the line." Upon me questioning him, he doesn't seem to have a reason behind his advice, and just insists I trust him. I'm from Australia, and taxis usually wait in lines. You have to take the next taxi in line as part of fairness. I explained to the bouncer not only will taxi driver number 1 not be happy, but taxi number 2 may not take my fare for no valid reason. Me being 19 and naive, I think to myself, I only live around the corner. I have my phone. What's the worst that could happen? Right? Wrong. I took the first taxi in line, and there were no immediate alarm bells. The man didn't seem any different to any other taxi driver. Not exactly polite or rude, just a taxi driver. We're a few minutes into the fare, driving along the coastlines to my suburb, when all of a sudden he pulls the taxi over on the side of the road and starts walking around to my door. At this point, I'm so confused as to what's going on. First, I thought maybe there was a flat tire, until he opens my door. I asked him what he was doing, and he replied, "We're going to the beach." Alarm bells and red flags went off left, right, and center. I grabbed my phone out and dialed 000 right away, and told him I was calling the police. He started to panic, and told me not to be silly as he just wanted some quality time, as he reached for my arm to get me out of the car. I pushed him away, closed the door, and waited to be connected. I read a lot about people who are polite to creepers in these situations, but I was anything but. At this point, I was connected with someone from emergency, who asked what my emergency was. I said that I needed assistance, and gave her my address. She then proceeded to tell me I needed to call the police assistance line if it wasn't an emergency. I responded with, "Well, it's about to be, if you don't get someone down here quick." She assured a car was on the way, and to get out of the car. We were only a minute or two down the road from where we departed, and usually there are 3 or 4 squad cars there preparing for the end of night antics. I knew I would have assistance in pretty much no time. While all this was happening, he was walking back to his driver's side and attempting to get back in. I don't know if he would have driven away with me in the car, kicked me out, or what, but I got out and he sped off. I kick myself for not getting his taxi ID, which is something that I usually do. I kick myself even more for not listening to the bouncer, who I see now obviously had a good reason for me to not get in this car. I rang my friend and asked her to stay on the phone with me. I just told her I was still outside waiting for the taxi and got bored. She offered to come and wait, but I insisted I was fine. Once the police came and took me home and asked for what had happened, they took a statement from me, but there wasn't much they could do, as I didn't get a license plate or taxi ID. The most I could provide was his appearance and the taxi company. I didn't tell anyone about the situation, except for my then friend and now boyfriend, who was a bit shaken up by this. I hated thinking about what could have happened to me that night, and how lucky I am that it didn't. About 2 months on, my boyfriend, his housemate, and my sister arrange a cab to pick us up from my boyfriend's place and take us to the same venue this all happened at. And who was the taxi driver? Yeah, same guy. I didn't say anything to anyone at the time because I know it wouldn't have turned out well. But this time, I got his ID and plate number and reported it to the police the next day. Apparently, this wasn't the first complaint they've had against this particular driver, but it was the furthest he had ever gone. Most of the other complaints were from creepy remarks and stuff like that. From what I know, the police made contact with the taxi company and informed them of the situation. I don't really know the outcome from then, but I've definitely learned my lesson from all of this. Me and my sisters, of which I have 3, grew up in a smallish country town in rural Australia. As you could probably imagine, there was not a lot going on there, and one by one we jumped ship and moved to greener pastures. In this instance, bigger and more exciting cities. This story's not mine, but it is my youngest sister's. When it came time for her to follow suit and move out, she followed the rest of us to Sydney. At the time of this story taking place, she was 19 years old. At her first work Christmas party, not long after she'd arrived in town, she got slightly intoxicated, and not knowing the city very well, opted to pay for a taxi in order to get home safely. She left the party, flagged one down, jumped in the front seat next to the driver, advised her destination, and began trying to make polite conversation. As she tells it, the driver was fine at first, but before too long he began turning the conversation to her looks. As she tells it, the driver was fine at first, but before too long he began turning the conversation to her looks and her job, telling her that she was gorgeous and asking if she did any modeling. She laughed it off and told him no. It was at this point that, while driving the taxi, he reached underneath her seat, pulled out a camera, and started taking photos of her. His compliments grew increasingly cruder, and she asked him repeatedly to stop taking her picture before getting angry and yelling at him to stop the taxi and let her out, which he refused to do. Thinking quickly, she looked ahead to see if there were any red lights coming up where he would have to stop the car. Luckily, there was one fast approaching. The driver slowed down gradually rather than driving to the lights and stopping, all the while continuing to take her photo. When he was finally driving slow enough that she felt she could exit the car without injuring herself, she opened the door and jumped out. He was moving slowly enough at this point that thankfully she wasn't injured. Drunk, scared, and lost, she sat in the gutter briefly to collect herself before finally coming to the realization that, as she had no clue where she was, she would have to get in another taxi to get home. Reluctantly, she flagged down another car, this time getting in the back seat and once again advising her destination. The driver of the second taxi saw that she had been crying and was visibly shaken up, and asked her what had happened and if she was all right. She explained the events. The second driver paused for a moment before informing her that the first driver had been taking her in the complete opposite direction of where she had said she needed to go. Attempts were made to find out who this guy was and report him. However, as my sister was drunk and new to the city, she wasn't able to provide enough specific information, such as location, exact time, taxi company, or description of the driver. Since this incident, whenever she has no other option but to get a taxi home, the first thing she does after getting in the car is take a photo of the driver's license with her phone. It makes my skin crawl to think that the guy who did this is more than likely still driving taxis in Sydney, and that this is heralded as being the safest way to get home if you're a young woman and it's late at night. I'm a petite 24-year-old female from the mainland of the US, but this story takes place when I was 19 and living in Oahu, Hawaii. Now, the area I lived in was really ghetto, and being half white, half Guamanian, but light-skinned, I was the closest thing to a white person in the entire city I lived in. Whenever I told a local where I lived, they'd give me a funny look like I was crazy or lying. This is actually pretty relevant. So because where I lived had absolutely no jobs and I was living with my Hawaiian and ghetto cousins who were all careless, I had to take 2 buses for an hour to work, both ways. The day this happened, I was covering for a coworker who had a family emergency, and it was a Sunday. I'd never worked a Sunday before, and this shift was also 2 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. No big deal. There's a bus stop right next to my work, and they run until midnight, right? Wrong. Buses stop running at 10 p.m. on Sundays. So here I am, standing at a bus stop alone for about 40 minutes. Businesses all around me are closing. It's getting darker and darker, and I'm starting to panic. I'm completely alone, save for the occasional hooker and John wandering around looking for dark alleyways. Hawaii is fucking scary at night. Don't believe the paradise hype. Outside of Waikiki and North Shore. All of a sudden, some homeless, toothless meth head pops out of nowhere and says, "The bus don't run this late. You're fucked. Start walking your skinny ass home." I realize how fucked I am. My neighborhood is seriously dangerous, so even if I did manage to walk home safely, there's no way I'm walking through Camp Park at night alone. It just isn't happening. I open my purse and check my wallet, and find out that one of my cousins has indeed borrowed my last $50, but was nice enough to leave me enough for the bus that wasn't coming, meaning I couldn't even call a cab. Oh, my phone was dead too, because there was some big shot GM at my work today, so I wasn't allowed to charge it at my cashier station, and didn't trust it alone in the break room. As I'm internally having a fucking breakdown, a taxi pulls up in front of me, windows down. "Sorry dude, I'd love a ride, but I don't have any cash," I told the taxi driver. He looks at me, looks around and sighs. "Well, where do you need to go? I can't leave you here now that I know that. I'll end up seeing you on the 5 o'clock news." I tell him my neighborhood, and he does a double take, then shrugs and mentions for me to get in the back. I'm so happy that I ignore this foreboding feeling I have in the back of my mind. I've only been living here for 2 months, and my luck has been so shitty, like being robbed, jumped, tricked into stealing, you name it, that I'm just like, yes, my luck is finally changing. I was wrong. I hop in the back seat, give him my cross streets kinda near my house, and tell him I'll get his number and pay him later. Thank God I couldn't remember my exact address. Everything is normal for the first 20 minutes of the ride. Then he starts asking me really weird questions. "How old are you? Are you a virgin? Are you married? Do you carry a gun in that big purse?" I lie and tell him yes on the gun, starting to feel creeped out. After that, he stops talking for a bit, until he notices he's almost out of gas. I look, and he really is almost out, so we pull up to a gas station. But instead of parking next to a pump, he parks behind the building near a dumpster, and says, "I'm going to pay for gas and have a snack, and then I'll take you back." I start to say something about needing to go home, but he cuts me off. "You're riding for free. Let me eat my fucking snack." I just say okay, and consider bolting when he comes back, but I have no idea where we are or how to get home. So instead, when he leaves, I reach into the front and unlock all the doors just in case. It was an older model car, so I knew they'd stay unlocked unless he manually locked them again. He comes back, empty-handed. No snack. Fuck. Am I the snack? Fuck. He gets in the front seat, opens the middle console, and pulls out a fucking meth pipe. A baggie of meth, a weed pipe, some weed, and a lighter. "Let me have my snack and then we can go." He packs the meth pipe, takes a few hits and blows it at me. And then he starts passing it to me. "I'm good right now, thanks." He looks pissed but puts it down and grabs the weed pipe, repeating the process. I'm like 2 seconds from bolting, when he throws the car in reverse and leaves without pumping any gas, now holding the meth pipe again and taking occasional hits. What the fuck? I'm freaking out. This dude is driving like 70 miles per hour in a 30 lane, high as a fucking kite. But the scenery starts to look familiar. I realize we're 5 minutes from my house. I look over. Doors are still unlocked. I have to think fast. His hand is slowly reaching for my knee, and he's looking right at me, not at the road, and moaning like my thigh is giving him the world's best orgasm. We're going to have fun tonight, baby. I'll teach you how to take a dick. I tell him I'm not interested, and he just laughs. Your phone is dead. Who are you gonna call? Ghostbusters? We're in Kalihi, girl. His hand is still on my leg, and he takes a left, away from the street I live on. I realize how fucked I am, but I'm oddly calm and change tactics. The problem is, if I don't check in, they'll come looking for me. I'm down to party, but I gotta check in first. I'm a little white girl, so if I don't come home, they'll go check my work and my coworkers, and they saw me leave with you. I don't want you to get in trouble. You know how we white people are. I'm counting on the fact that he doesn't know my family isn't white. I'm counting on the fact that he's high enough to not know I'm lying, and counting on the fact that he didn't see all my coworkers were gone. He gives me a weird look, then hands me the pipe. Okay, let's party. I hold the pipe up to my lips, wait for him to look towards the road, and emulate what I saw him doing, turning it side to side while lighting it. I produce a tiny bit of smoke, don't inhale and immediately blow it out, hoping to God I don't get fucking high, and that I never have to explain why there's meth in my system if I do. You're fucking burning it! He gets pissed and grabs the not hot end up from the pipe from me, wasting my fucking dinner. I'll show you how to do it right. He takes a hard right, and I realize he's headed for the cross streets I told him. My vision is a little fucked. Everything seems too bright, and my adrenaline starts to feel almost euphoric. At this point, I realize I'm high. The street I live on is wrapped around a hill, easily a mile wide, and the cross streets I gave him are about a quarter mile from my house. As we get close to the cross streets, he slows down, asking me what my house is. I lie and say that I can't tell, and ask him to slow down because it's so dark and I just moved there. All the houses look the same, and I'm high, so I ask him to please slow down. He obliges and slows down to about 5 miles an hour, and I make a break for it, swinging the door open and jumping out of the still moving car. I feel like I'm fucking flying as I hit the dirt of the sidewalk, then I break out into a run. I probably looked like a fucking lunatic, arms flailing, but I didn't give a fuck, nor did I bother looking back. The oldest cousin I lived with was 39, male and built like a fucking Samoan. If I could just get to my house, everything would be okay. That was all I could think. Plus, because he'd turned, we had actually passed my house, so we would have to drive to the next driveway and turn around because it was a narrow road. He was at the end of the bottom of the hill, so he wouldn't be able to see which house I was in either. I didn't see headlights, so I figured that was a good sign. Finally, I ran into my front yard, unlocked the door, relocked it, and slid down onto the floor, a shaking and crying mess. I went to the front window and peeked out. No one on the street. No cabbie. Nothing. I was safe, or so I thought. I ended up not telling anyone what had happened, because I always got the same lecture when something bad happened to me. You were acting like some stupid little college white girl, if you were smarter, and all that sort of thing. But everything seemed okay. I started working day shifts only, avoided being alone or ever at the bus stop, and life went on. About a week later, I noticed a black car with tinted windows parked a few houses down from my house. I figured it was a neighbor's friend and brushed it off. Only it was there the next day too, and the next after that. I finally asked one of my cousins, about 17 years old, if he'd seen it. He said it showed up around 6 every day, which is when I would get home from work. I started freaking out. Finally, I broke down and told my giant cousin what had happened, leaving out the meth part. Surprisingly, he didn't give me a lecture. He felt bad that I felt I couldn't come to him for support, and apologized for riding me so hard about being from the mainland. He said he'd deal with the black car. The next day, my cousin's son picked me up from the bus stop near the house on his moped. We noticed the black car following us, but acted like we didn't. We pulled up to the house, and as soon as the black car parked, out came my Samoan-built, muscle-bound cousin with a metal baseball bat, taking practice swings as he approached the car. It reversed halfway down the street, hit a fence, jumped a curb, turned around in a front yard, and was never seen again. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys did enjoy the video, please feel free to leave feedback in the comments below, or perhaps like, share, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have a story you'd like to share, or you'd just like to chat sometime, go ahead and take a look in the description below. There will be links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to include your story in a video or respond to your message as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, what the theme is if it has any, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious at all about the music used in this video, that is always listed in the description below, by name in the order which it appears in the video, and I'll also have links to the artists as well if you'd like to check out more of their work. So if you're curious about the music, go ahead and check down there in the description. Last but not least, if you guys have any constructive criticism, please be sure to let me know in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.